Okay, so I appear to be live. I'm just checking who's on. Uh-huh. Jordan, can you hear me? Um, um, can you hear me? Um, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Haya? Or Jordan? Can you message me on the group chat if you can, please? Okay, great. Um, I can't hear anybody else, so that means that it appears to be one-way communication. Okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I have no idea if this is recording. So what I'm going to do, okay, so I'm going to assume this is recording. I have no feedback from the audience. What I'm going to do is just quickly run through the questions that were sent through, and then basically I will go back to a normal hangout in order to be able to take questions from everybody. So basically, there were 3 topics to cover today. The 3 topics are most adverbs seem unspecified to me. I can clearly see or suddenly hear, just as I can suddenly see or clearly hear. Are there many adverbs that are specific to a representational system? Well, what I did was I looked up the top 250 adverbs in the English language that are used. And in that list, more than 90% were unspecified. I went through them, and I'll send that list out to everybody. There were a small percentage of kinesthetic adverbs, and then there was 1 visual adverb, which is clearly. So the questioner was correct in that regard. The second question was, can driver submodalities come from a representational system other than one's primary? So first of all, let me clarify. It's not necessarily the case that someone has a primary representational system. It's perfectly possible that people have primary representational systems. But as we pointed out during the workshop, the use of representational systems, a primary representational system is really an overuse of a specific representational system, but people generally have access to all representational systems, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And sometimes that overuse can be contextual. So it can be that the overuse could be in one representational system whilst in a work or office setting, and it could be that that primary representational system could be different in the home setting or on holiday. So having said that, there's no need for a driver submodality to be in the primary representational system. In the manuals, you have examples of lots of different submodalities within the primary modalities of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So for example, in visual, there is the brightness, there's color, there's light, there's how sharply in focus something is, there's distance away if someone has a picture, there's position of the picture, top left, bottom right, top right, bottom left, central. There's whether it's associated or dissociated, i.e. they're in the picture and they're seeing what's going on, that's associated. Or they can see themselves in a picture, that's dissociated. Whether there's a frame around the picture, or whether it's just hazy around the edges. These can all be examples of driver submodalities in the visual representational system. Sounds, whether it's loud or weak, whether it's dull, whether it's sharp, whether it's stereo, whether it's mono, i.e. in one ear only or both ears. Whether there's a lot of detail to the sound in terms of timbre and pitch, whether it's high or low in terms of depth, down there deep, high, that kind of thing. So whether it's distant or near, and these can all make a difference. And then there's the kinesthetic submodalities. So whether there's some kind of internal sensation. Now, it's possible, or some kind of tactile feeling, and what those are, whether there's pressure down or whether there's some kind of lift up. Now, it's possible that there could be, even within the submodalities, a lead, as in a visual, which generates then a kinesthetic. And remember that what we said was the primary representational system, if one exists, if there's an overuse, would be where decisions get made from. So I might see a bright, clean kitchen, and then I might feel what I term good about it, whatever feeling good means to me. And we're all unique in terms of how we structure our submodalities. So I think it's perfectly possible that I'm just saying thank you to everybody for your messages on WhatsApp. So I'm just going to keep talking through these three areas, and then and hopefully it's recording. And then what I'll do is I'll redial so that we can all interact on another hangout where we can just talk to each other simultaneously. So so the driver submodality could be in any representational system. For example, with myself, quite often auditory is a driver submodality. And when I say it's a driver submodality, it changes my kinesthetics phenomenally. So certain music, certain sounds shift my kinesthetics phenomenally. So my primary representational system more often than not is kinesthetic, but the driver can be auditory for me, just by way of example. Or you know, it can be that in certain circumstances, a visual driver can make a huge difference on me kinesthetically. So I hope that helps. We will be covering strategies in the core skills module. And strategies, if you remember, when we were in the introduction, I gave a few examples of writing down the sequence of steps in the representational systems and their submodalities. So I gave an example about waking up in the morning and my mouth watering. And I said, well, what actually happened? I woke up in the morning, I heard the birds singing, I pictured a cup of coffee, I smelt the coffee. So that was, you know, visual internal, where there was an auditory, I heard a bird singing, then there was a visual internal of a cup of coffee, then there was a olfactory internal of the smell of coffee, then there was the visual internal of a slice of toast, then there was the kinesthetic internal of buttering the toast, then there was the kinesthetic internal of biting the toast, then there was the gustatory internal of tasting the toast, and then my mouth watered. So that was the strategy, the piecing together of all of the elements that led to an external kinesthetic of my mouth watering. And so when we go into strategies, and I've been writing the manual for strategies. When I say writing the manual, I've been writing some of the exercises for the core skills manual, and I'm really excited about it, to be honest with you. There's some exercises on sensory acuity and calibration. There are some exercises on calibrating agreement and disagreement. There are some exercises on introduction to hypnotic patterning and self-hypnosis for yourselves, which I think are going to be quite exciting. There is, I'm just flicking through my notebook here. There are some, I'm going to be presenting the NLP change model and how we generate change in individuals where they want to. And there's a whole lot of information on meta programs. So when we did when we covered epistemology, you'll remember that I talked about input and events, and then I talked about F1 filters, the neurological transforms. Then I talked about representation or experience. And then I talked about the F2 language filters, where we apply language to experience to give it meaning. And then we ended up with our maps. So I talked about the F2 language filters and the giving meaning. And so what I'm going to be providing you with on the core skills module is examples, and there are 20 or 30 examples of different filters, so that it starts making it real. It starts making the fact that I was explaining that we all have a unique fingerprint, we all have unique retinas, we all have unique life experiences which build up into values and beliefs. And examples of these filters So the F2 language filters and the filters that create our values and beliefs based on our life experiences. So for example, external behavior filters, introvert versus extrovert, internal processes, intuitive versus sensing, internal state, thinker versus feeler, and adaptive response, judger versus perceiver. So people who understand Myers-Briggs type indicators will recognize those as elements on the MBTI scale. But then we go into direction filters, away from and towards in terms of motivation, reason filters, possibility versus necessity, frame of reference, internal frame of reference versus external frame of reference, convincer representations. What does it take to convince me? Do I need to see it, hear it, experience it, or read about it? And the list just goes on and on and on. And these, so once you start getting all an appreciation of all of these different filters, you start to appreciate how unique each individual is and where life experiences take us. And once we get good at calibration, and we will be doing exercises on initial calibration, then all of a sudden, when you understand what the filters are, or what, you know, typical examples of a number of different filters are, and you start getting good at calibrating, and you get very good at listening to people's conversations, like what they say, which gives us clues as to the way they think, then all of a sudden you can start picking up conversationally on all of their different filters, and you can start to understand how to calibrate against their filters, and you get much greater insights about the individuals that you're interacting with, and how you can shift, we can shift our own communication patterns to tune in to their filters, so that we can convey our message across to them in a way that they can receive it in a much better manner. And then it's all about practice, 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 as I keep saying. So, and the more we practice, all I can say is the more we practice, the better our outcomes. And there's really nothing more phenomenal than suddenly getting very good responses from people that we may have previously not had good interactions with, and that's a phenomenal difference, I promise you, when it starts happening. So that was me jumping into some other bits. Nadia is saying voice disappeared. I don't know, Nadia, if you can hear me at all. I'm showing green lights when I'm speaking. So if you can send me a message to let me know whether you can hear me or not on WhatsApp, that would be great. Or put a message in the group chat. I think you can join the group chat and a message will pop up on my screen. So that was, I started getting a bit excited about the meta programs in talking about the second question on driver submodalities. Many of these things are interlinked, and that's why we give you the background that we do in the introduction, so that we can then go on to meta programs and you can understand. And so we've already talked a bit about strategies. We will talk more about strategies, and so you have a good understanding, hopefully, or an overview at least from the introduction. So let me just tell you, before I go into content versus progress, let me just tell you the 10 topics that we're going to cover on the core skills module. So we're going to talk about, first off, we're going to talk about the NLP change model and meta programs, so that you can understand how everything we've talked about so far goes into the change model, and what the meta programs, examples of the meta programs are, which are those filters built on life experiences. And then we're going to go into calibration. So we're going to do exercises to help you practice calibrating individuals that you're working with. Because if you remember, what I said was, and applications, which is the module after that, is where we do a lot of change work. We practice on colleagues in the course, and we experience some changes ourselves as part of that process. But remember what I said to you, that actually none of the applications matter. What really matters is intention, setting an intention, because that does communicate unconsciously. Our state, and we'll be working on choosing our state, which I'll go into, rapport and calibration. So in the core skills module, we've already, in the introduction, we did a little bit of calibration and we worked on establishing rapport. What we will focus on in the core skills, not focus on, but what will play a big part in terms of those 4 points that I talked about: intention, state, rapport, and calibration. We'll be covering calibration, and we'll be covering choosing our emotional state. But as I said, we'll start with the NLP change model and meta programs, because that helps us understand filters and uniqueness, and helps us revise over epistemology, those stages that I talked about, the inputs and events, the F1 neurological transforms, like the impulses being transformed into our optic nerve and to our ultimately occipital cortex. The experience at the occipital lobe in the visual representational system, the experience, the representation, the first access, then the linguistic transforms, F2, and then our creation of our maps and our attachment of meaning. So we'll do the meta programs and the filters. We'll then do calibration. We're then going to go into the Milton model, which is one of the language pattern models. And after the Milton model, we're going to do the meta model, which is going into specificity. And once we've done the, okay, I can see voices back again, don't worry, from Nadia, and a thumbs up from Haya, thank you. So once we've done the Milton model, which is about gaining agreement with people, chunking up to a level where we can get agreement with people, and I'll go into that in a minute. Then we go into the meta model, which is about chunking down into specificity. And when I talk about chunking up and chunking down, we're then going to, having had the practical examples, because remember, there's exercises in all of this, and what I'm explaining is that you know, we're really, everything that we do going forward is largely going to be practical. We'll cover some of the theory, but it's really about practice, practice, practice. Once we've done the Milton model and we've done the meta model, what we'll then explain is logical levels. So I talked about chunking up. So we go up logical levels to get agreement, and then chunking down, we go down logical levels to get specificity, to really implement things. So we'll cover logical levels, and then we'll do simple hypnotic patterning. So that's really around self-hypnosis. And we'll do a couple of exercises where you'll see that actually it's possible to induce trance. And it's really all about what I call trance work. It's really possible to induce trance just using 2 words. And those 2 words are, that's right. It's as simple as that. So you'll be practicing that, inducing trance to help people and help yourselves, and also self-hypnosis using something called the Betty Erickson technique. So the style of hypnotherapy that we utilize in NLP is Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which I'll explain on the core skills. But we use Ericksonian hypnotherapy, which is a very, I like to think of it as a very dignified and a very graceful and elegant form of hypnotherapy. Very soft, very gentle, and very indirect. And it's really designed as a therapeutic application. So we'll do some self-hypnosis using the Betty Erickson technique. Betty Erickson was Milton Erickson's wife, and she was very good at self-hypnosis. And there's a specific technique that you can all use for yourselves. And then we'll do, we'll cover strategies, choosing our emotional states, anchoring, which some of you got a taster of, and I think that's about it. There's 10 topics. I think I've covered them all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cover the last topic, which was process versus content. So we will do some exercises on that in the core skills, process versus content, to get that in place. When we talk about content, in a therapeutic context in NLP, a client comes to us if we're offering therapy with a story about how they've got to where they are and what's important for them and the like. And these are basically what they tell themselves to keep themselves into their current situation. Quite often you'll hear the words because, and that's, we'll learn in the meta model, that's a cause-effect violation, which I discussed with you at the introduction. So when we're listening, he made me feel bad because he said, la, 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 la. So there's two things there. It's the cause effect. He made me feel bad because X, Y, Z. So what I've picked out there is the structure of the wording, not the specific content. So you'll have lists on the core skills in the meta model of cause effect. After we've explained what they are, you'll have conversations, you'll pair up and you'll have conversations with each other. And what I'll be asking you to do is tick off the different violations in the conversations that you're hearing. Now, the point for me about the meta model is we can use it on ourselves when we speak. If you remember, I said that in between stimulus and response is an instant where we can choose our behavior. In the same way, when we have a conversation, there's an instant between when we think about what we're going to say and we utter it. And in that instant, we can consider whether we're having we're creating a meta model violation in terms of what we say. And sometimes you might hear me actually stop midway through a sentence and restructure what I'm saying. The point about the meta model is it helps us be far more specific about what we're conveying. And if I'm talking and I were to start to say, they made me, I might suddenly realize, hang on, that's cause effect. No one makes you. I chose at that point in time to feel X, Y, Z. Because again, there's a cause effect violation. So I might think, I chose to feel that somewhere quite often, for example, I do choose to feel that way. And then I can deliberately, the point is that we don't not use, I've used the double negative there. You'll remember from our conversations about the unconscious that we don't process negatives. I make a choice because I'm meta modeling what I say as to what I say. And so understanding the meta model violations enables me to make a choice as to whether I want to use it or not, whether I feel it's appropriate in that circumstance. There's a difference between using them without thinking, running a program of thinking patterns, and being able to choose and decide that is what we're going to do. Now, when we interact with other people, and you'll have the lists about the meta model violations, and I'm going to ask you to tick off the meta model violations that you detect, whether it's cause effect, whether it's mind read, I know you're going to think this, whether it's a modal operator of necessity, he should do this, or he must do this, or he needs to do this, etc. That I'm not going to ask you to challenge them, although I will teach you how to challenge yourself with them. I'm not going to ask you to challenge the other person. What I'm going to, like with the predicates, and like with the eye accessing cues, I'm going to suggest to you that when you talk with the individual on a subsequent occasion, you look at what metamodel violations they tend to use, and you talk to them using their metamodel violations, albeit you may have different content. And that's the point about content versus process. And I suspect that you'll find that as with the predicates and as with the matching and mirroring, the rapport that you establish with an individual when you mirror their metamodel violations, regardless of the content, the rapport will be significantly deeper. Now, what you can then do when you're in rapport, deep rapport with someone, is you can start to gently challenge the metamodel violations, and you'll learn how to do that. My prime focus, though, in teaching you the metamodel violations is on self-application, in terms of how we as individuals communicate better with other people. So to recap on content versus process, we're able to establish very deep rapport with individuals if we structure the way we communicate with them in a manner that's very similar to the way that they structure their communication with other people themselves. And so gradually, bit by bit, what you'll be learning is the structure of how the other person thinks. And when you understand the structure of how the other person thinks, it's much easier to match them in many different ways and establish very deep rapport, which means that it's much easier to deliver a message to them in a way that they can absorb it. And all of a sudden, once you get much more powerful communication, you're communicating, nominalization, that's another metamodel violation. Changing a verb to a noun, communication is the noun, communicating, to communicate is the verb. So in the way that we communicate with other people, we can establish very deep rapport, and we can achieve results very, very quickly in whatever way we want to. We can have a difference of opinion with them in a very respectful and dignified and courteous way, and be constructive in terms of how we collaborate with them to get a win-win solution. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop this hangout, and then I am going to redial everybody in the standard hangout format just to take any questions. All right, thank you very much.